Did I ever tell you about the time I almost got into a fight in Las Vegas for speaking Japanese to a total stranger? Let me explain. After living in Japan for a few years, I was on vacation in America. I was in a crowded casino, and I guess muscle memory just kicked in because I associated being in a crowd with speaking Japanese. So when we accidentally bumped into each other, I automatically said, "Sumimasen." He turned around and said, "What did you say?" And I remember thinking, how do I explain this? Fortunately, the crowd was moving in all directions, and soon there were several people between us. I decided to go about my business and be more careful. People who have ties to both Japan and the West often ask themselves, how do I act in this situation? There's a tension between these two sets of deeply ingrained values, expectations, and ways of being. They experience internal struggles and external friction as they try to reconcile competing cultural norms. Here are some common conflicts that might arise. Collectivism versus individualism. Japan's culture prioritizes the group, family, workplace, society, often requiring conformity and sacrifice of personal desires. The US, meanwhile, celebrates standing out and pursuing one's own path. A bicultural person might feel torn between honoring family, like staying close to home, or chasing personal dreams, like moving abroad for a career. Indirectness versus directness. Japanese communication relies on subtlety, reading between the lines, avoiding conflict, while Americans value bluntness, honesty, and getting to the point. This can leave them unsure whether to hint at disagreement politely or speak up assertively, risking alienation in either context. Duty versus freedom. In Japan, there's a strong sense of obligation to parents, employers, or traditions, which might clash with the West's emphasis on personal choice and breaking free from constraints. They might grapple with guilt for not fulfilling expectations, like caring for aging parents, while still craving autonomy. One American friend was dating a Japanese woman. They were both around 30 years old. After about a month, she started making wedding plans, and he was like, "Hey, we hardly know each other," but she answered, "We're both almost 30, it's time to get married." Belonging and otherness. They might feel like an outsider in both places, too Americanized for Japan, like too loud and informal, or too Japanese for the US, overly reserved or polite. And this can lead to persistent sense of not fully fitting in anywhere. Work-life balance. Now, Japan's culture often demands long hours and loyalty to the company, while the US increasingly values flexibility and personal time. They might struggle with whether to push themselves relentlessly or set boundaries and feeling judged either way. Emotional expression. Japan tends to favor restraint and masking negative emotions to maintain harmony, whereas the US encourages letting it out, whether joy or frustration. They might feel conflicted about suppressing feelings to fit one norm and expressing them and risking disapproval. Tradition versus change. Japan's respect for history and ritual can conflict with the US's obsession with progress and reinvention. A bicultural person might wrestle with preserving cultural practices like obon while celebrating a fast-paced, future-focused lifestyle. Societal expectations. In Japan, blending in and meeting societal milestones, like getting married by a certain age, is key, while many in the West think that conformity is a joke. They might feel pressure to conform in Japan and judgment for not being unique enough in the West. What's your experience as a bicultural person? The good and the bad. Start a discussion in the comments below. Another thing about bicultural people is that they often experience isolation, one of the drawbacks of being bicultural. Bicultural people tend to seek out each other and sometimes have difficulty with people who just don't understand both cultures. I remember feeling isolated that night in Las Vegas. I mean, nobody around me understood why I could make a mistake like that. When I worked for an international company, I often had to explain that their great plan formulated in New York or London simply wasn't going to work in Japan. Sometimes they just dismissed me outright. Try explaining to someone who's never heard of Golden Week that you're not going to get any meetings during that week. And try explaining to somebody that the person you've been talking to in the accounting department has moved to the purchasing department because, well, that's what they do in April. Sometimes the people around you just don't believe you. Identity labels. Others might demand they pick a side. Are you Japanese or Western? When in the reality is both and neither at the same time. This external pigeonholing can clash with their fluid, hybrid sense of self. A Japanese person who's bicultural might sometimes doubt their place in society. They might wonder, am I Japanese enough? And a bicultural Westerner might have the same conundrum in a different way. As a long-term resident of Japan, if I say something in favor of Japan, people might think I'm a weeb. Can I tell a tourist that they're not supposed to talk on the phone on the train? Is that my place? Value judgments. They might internalize critiques from both cultures. Japan's view of the West is brash and selfish, and the US's view of Japan is too rigid and repressed, leading to self-doubt that makes you wonder, which identity is the right one? What game do I play here? In reality, two things can be true at the same time. Now, these conflicts can manifest as stress, indecision, or a search for balance. Over time, many bicultural people learn ways to integrate these tensions and draw strength from both. The journey often involves a lot of negotiation and self-reflection. The good news is, having a solid grasp of two cultures means you bring a perspective to the table that most people just don't have. Exposure to different cultures fosters a deeper understanding of different worldviews, values, and traditions. This can lead to greater empathy, improved problem-solving skills, and the ability to see issues from multiple angles. When confronted with a new situation, they're more able to adapt, rather than push back on things they don't understand. Bicultural individuals often develop a heightened ability to adjust to different environments, meet expectations. This flexibility makes them more resilient and effective in different settings, whether personal or professional contexts. Bicultural individuals are often exceptional communicators, able to bridge the gap between people of two different backgrounds. If you're bicultural, count yourself as one of the lucky ones.